Thank you so much. I would like to start by thanking Penn State, the ECHO program, the CDC, and of course, all of you for attending this session. Um, I will let you know I am not planning to give you any breakout discoveries or any important information. Probably a lot of the things that I'm going to be mentioning to you, you might already know. But my hope is that this presentation develops into a very important discussion and we all can share the knowledge that we'll have in our own fields of work. So my name is Diego Chavez Geneco. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician, meaning that with that, I did 3 years of general pediatrics. And after that, I did a fellowship in developmental behavioral pediatrics. I spent a lot of my time seeing kids with developmental delays, with autism, with learning disabilities. But I also wear another hat, which is I'm the founder and program director of Salud para Niños, the three words in Spanish for health for the children. And actually, Salud is an acronym for students, residents, faculty, and Latinos United Against Health Disparities. So this is a program that I founded 22 years ago with the goal to address needs for our Latino kids and, of course, all needs, but of course, developmental and learning needs for our kids. I'm a professor of pediatrics here at UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, and at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. So today, I'm going to talk to you guys about some principles of normal development. We're going to review some basics of developmental violence. This is kind of like what we talk to our medical students, and a lot of these concepts are part of a book that some of you guys might be familiar, which is the Satelli Atlas. It's the Atlas on Pediatrics. I am honored and humbled to be the author of the chapter on developmental behavioral pediatrics, which we wrote with Dr. Heidi Feldman, who is one of the leaders in this field. She used to be in Pittsburgh for about 25 years, and now she's a professor in Stanford. We're going to review the importance of developmental monitoring, and hopefully you guys link this to what is available to the CDC. We're going to be reviewing some of what I consider some successes of developmental monitoring and then some of the challenges. And hopefully, as I said before, this is just like an appetizer, an introduction for a further discussion where all can share our own experience and knowledge. So in terms of principle of child development, development is common use in terms of domains and function. And again, many of you guys know already this, but basically that we are on the same page. Gross motor skills refer to the use of large muscles of the body, things like holding your head, sitting down, standing up, walking, running, jumping. And if you think about what I just did in a sequence because some of the principles of development is that they always happen in a certain sequence. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Then you have your fine motor skills that refers to the use of small muscles and in particular the small muscles of the hands. So things like, a pincer grasp, holding a pencil, a crayon, using utensils. And when they're a little bit older, starting to do certain things, drawing a circle, drawing a cross, drawing a square, drawing a triangle. Again, I did in a certain sequence, the way that it usually happens chronologically by age on the kids. We also have the domain of cognition, which means the use of higher mental process, including thinking, memory, and learning. The domain of language, in which we should evaluate not only expressive, but receptive language and functional conversation, functional communication in relation to the comprehension and production of meaningful symbolic communication. And then we have this domain of social and emotional function, which refers to the skills of interactions with others and emotional reactions to people and events. So thinking again in a chronological way, things that the kids do at the beginning, which might go from eye contact, the Gestalt smile, parallel play, cooperative play, and pretend play, among others. So each domain, each skills are typically acquired in a predictable sequence, although the age of acquisition of a specific milestones might vary across children. So not all kids are the same, but we have some ranges and when we expect these things to happen. But they do happen in a predictable sequence, the way that I kind of described it when I was talking about each different domains. This has to do with some basic principles of child development. Some of the principles has to do with usually the developmental skills happen head to toe. So a lot of the first things happen in the head. When I was talking about gross motor, I was talking about holding the head, sitting down, then standing up, then walking. So always think about the development happens head to toe. The other principle is that it happen from the midline to the outer line, centrifugal. So for example, things like, again, holding their head or using their mouth or smiling versus things that might happen later on, such as the pincer grasp, holding thelding hands, holding utensils, holding crayons. The reason that this happen in this sequence has to do with many processes that are neurobiological, such as myelinization, the process of myelinization. So these are things that happen biological in the body, and as they happen, kids are able to acquire different milestones. Again, not happening all the kids at the same time, but might happen in a certain order in a center range, which again is part of the tools that the CDC is providing to us. The domains of development are interdependent. So sometimes as much as we talk about different domains, the domains cross over. So for example, cognitive abilities in infancy cannot be really distinguished from sensory functioning. Similarly, mature social functions depends on competent language abilities. For those of you who care for kids with autism, you think that, or you know that the social skills don't fully develop until they start having language skills. I have many of my patients that the family says, you know, my child seems to want to interact with other kids, but because they have their language delays, they don't know how to do it. They don't are able to do it. So those domains definitely cross over. Early reflex patterns and congenital sensory and motor capabilities are the building blocks of higher order skills. So other of the principles of the normal development is that we have some reflex that happen initially, such as the motor reflex, among others. And then as these reflexes appear, you know, you start to see other developmental skills that appear. The other principle is that things go from dependent to independent. So you think about our little babies, initially they need to be provided for everything, holding their heads, being carried on, and being fed, to starting to hold their own heads on their own, starting to stand up, starting to walk, starting to feed themselves. So dependency to independency. Okay, so let's talk about developmental surveillance. So developmental surveillance is something that we pediatricians do, and maybe some of you guys do, and other fields as providers. We usually talk to our medical students about the importance of doing development surveillance during the well checker visits. It refers to the longitudinal and continuous process for which providers use all available clinical tools to determine a child's developmental status, to evaluate his or her developmental progress over time, and to identify children who might be at risk for disorders. So again, this is what happens when the kids are coming or the families are coming for the well checker visits since early age as a newborns, 2, 4, 6 months, 9 months, 15 months. We want to know what is going on in their development. Are they acquiring those developmental skills sometimes? Parents are generally accurate reporters of current developmental status, and therefore their concerns are sensitive indicators for delays or atypical patterns of development. So, you know, I always tell my families, the person who knows the best about your child is you. No matter who, especially you're seeing, parents are the ones who know the best. So we need to listen to parents. Parents are never wrong. You know, if we fail, it's because we don't listen to parents. And then in terms of surveillance, it requires the clinicians to elicit appropriate and to attend to parental concerns, and includes the information that we obtain from other providers, including therapists, teachers, many of you guys who are today on the call, daycare providers, etc. We obtain a developmental history, we make pertinent observations of current developmental behaviors, we perform a physical examination, and we might administer or review interpret screening tests and use other assessment techniques. So all that part is development surveillance that we do as physicians, as pediatricians. But a really important part of development surveillance is developmental monitoring, and that's where it comes from the parents. And again, that's where the tools, for example, that the CDC is providing to families now these days are very helpful, because parents need to know what their expectations should be for their kids. So it's an important component of development surveillance, and it promotes a longitudinal view of the child that allows parents' concerns to be addressed in a timely manner. Parental concerns can be elicited by developmental monitoring and by tools used by this purpose. And again, I cannot emphasize the importance of using tools like the ones that the CDC are making available for our communities. A formal developmental assessment can be arranged if these are severe or persistent concerns. So, you know, we have developmental surveillance, which is what we pediatricians we do in our child care visits. We have developmental monitoring that the parents might do at home. And then finally, if there are concerns, we should refer for an intervention for developmental assessment for formal developmental evaluations. So what are the success of this developmental monitoring? So developmental surveillance and developmental monitoring can lead to early identification of concerns, problems, and diagnosis, and therefore early intervention, early diagnosis, and early treatment. So I cannot emphasize the word early enough. It's really important that we do this in a timely manner. When I was talking about principles of development, I was telling you that it happens in a certain sequence, in a certain time, and it has to do with what is happening at the neurobiological level, things like myelinization at the different levels that happen in the child. These things happen in a certain way, in a certain sequence, at a certain time. If we don't treat it, if we don't address it at a specific time, we might miss literally the bus. When I'm talking to the families, I'm telling them this is when you're in the street waiting for the bus. If you miss the bus that you were supposed to take, You might take another one, but you're not going to be taking the one that you wanted to take. So really important that we provide the service on time, that we address on time, that these families, that these kids receive the service on time. If we miss that opportunity, it might not be the same. Really important that we're early. So early intervention, early diagnosis, and early treatment are conducive for better outcomes and prognosis. Many of the kids that I care for have the diagnosis of autism, and of course, parents are interested in their prognosis. And I tell them one of the most important things in terms of prognosis is how early the diagnosis is made, how early the concerns have been identified, and of course, how many services that they receive. Um, Participation of parents is essential in the process of identification of the concerns, problems, and diagnosis, and therefore to early intervention, early diagnosis, and early treatment, and therefore for better outcomes and prognosis. And development monitoring is an instrumental tool for parent participation. So what are the challenges? So some of the challenges that we have is that developmental monitoring can be affected by personal cultural beliefs and sometimes of misconceptions. We know that there are different developmental approaches depending on the culture. Some cultures put more emphasis, for example, in potty training. We know that there are kids who are potty training earlier than other ones. But despite these cultural differences, that we need to be sensitive about it. I don't expect anybody to be cultural competent, but cultural sensitive. We need to know whether kids are meeting their milestones are expected. So we need to make sure that developmental monitoring is happening, that the parents are aware about what they should expect with their kids, and also that we take into consideration those cultural beliefs, that they were sensitive to those cultural beliefs. It is really important to consider and assess language and cultural differences and personal and cultural beliefs and misconceptions. One of the biggest misconceptions that we see is that people tend to think, and I hope if you guys learn something from me today, if I can share some of my knowledge with you guys, is that never, please never capital letters, and I tell this to my residents and to my students, never bilingualism should be a reason of consideration for language delayed. So we have many families who don't get service on time, and they don't receive their evaluations on time because somebody told them that, well, your child is behind on their language development is because they are being exposed to bilingualism. That should never a reason. We have over 100 languages in our country. Many kids grow in bilingual environments. That's not a reason for language delayed. If a child has a language delay, that should be addressed, that should be investigated, that should be evaluated. The reason is non-bilingualism. So that's one of the misconceptions that we have. One of the challenges in terms of that is that sometimes families know that, for example, bilingualism is not a reason for language delay, but yet the providers have that misconception and they don't make those referrals. And if they make those referrals, sometimes what we see is that sometimes unfortunate families are denied services because, oh, well, we cannot provide you with speech therapy because we don't have a speech pathologist who speaks Spanish. My analogy to that is that we don't hold kids from going to school if we don't have providers who speak the language in the school that the families speak at home. Kids go to school in English regardless of what the families speak at home. And then finally, lack of health insurance could be a barrier. In general, we all know, and no, I'm preaching to the choir here, is that insurance is not a reason, lack of health insurance is not a reason to have early intervention, early evaluations, but yet it can be a problem sometimes when we're referring for further more specific evaluations like developmental specialists, or in the case of autism, for intensive behavioral service, applied behavior analysis. So bottom line, it's really important that we consider developmental monitoring, that we promote developmental monitoring about parents and families using tools like the one that the CDC make available for us. And then, of course, that we partnership with providers, in particular with pediatricians, with PCPs, to do developmental surveillance.